Okay, so now I'd like to move on to the next layer of the epidermis, which is going to be the dermis. And so here we're going to be talking about dermal features, and that's where we're moving next. Again, make sure you're looking at these learning goals. These really spell out what are the expectations for you for this section. Okay. Let's go for a minute to a PowerPoint slide here. Okay, so as a reminder, what we're looking at, the skin layers, here are the hairs that you could see on the top of your head, your arms, wherever. And so here's the top layer, the epidermis, which is that epithelial layer. And now we've moved into the dermis, which is connective tissue layers. So on your notes packet, it asks you about these two different sublayers of the dermis. So notice that the dermis can be divided into the papillary layer and into the reticular layer. Now, one thing I want to point out is that on the epidermis side, you have these little up and down. So if you're on the epidermal side, that's called an epidermal ridge. Okay, so if we're looking here, epidermal ridge. But if we're on the dermal side, okay, so now we're here on the dermis side of things. It still goes up and down, but that raised bump is then going to be called a dermal papilla, and it's papillae if we're talking plural. And I think I may actually have a better picture of that. Here it's showing where the epidermis and the dermis are separated. So this would be the epidermal ridge, and this bump right here would be the dermal papillae. Okay. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to look at these two layers in depth. So first we have the papillary layer, which is on top. It's going to be running close to these dermal papillae. And then underneath, which is the larger layer, is going to be the reticular layer. Okay. Now, we already learned in our connective tissue lectures what these tissue types are. So the papillary layer has areolar tissue. So if you ask yourself what types of fibers are there, well, hopefully from chapter 4 you know, well, we've got all types of fibers. Now, I do want to point out that collagen is going to be particularly important for providing strength to the skin, and then it does have those elastic fibers, which gives it recoil. So I can pull on my skin, and now it goes back to pretty much normal. Okay. The reticular layer, this is going to be dense, irregular connective tissue. And so if you remember from this, the predominant fiber is going to be collagen. It's going to be arranged in irregular bundles. And so this, again, is going to give even more strength to that skin so that it's something that can really help protect from abrasion, from impact, those sorts of things, that it doesn't split apart easily. Okay. Now, what you may notice whenever you look here at the dermis, okay, is this is where the bulk of most of your accessory structures are located. So again, here would be your hair going up. Here is going to be a sweat gland. It's a coiled tubular gland. It's going to send sweat onto the surface of the skin. And then over here, we've got our sebaceous gland, which is going to secrete oil onto the follicle of the hair. You may also notice that we have these structures. We've got one right here. We've got one over here. Okay, and so these are going to be nervous system structures. They're going to help sense touch. You may also notice that we have this little black thing here, and this is going to be free nerve endings. Okay, so these help sense pain. This helps sense, this is a Meissner's corpuscle. This is going to sense light touch. This is going to be a Pacinian corpuscle. This senses deep pressure or vibration. Okay. Now the other thing you may notice is you may notice these blood vessels that we're going to have running through the different layers, okay? And so what we have here is we're going to have the subpapillary plexus, and that's going to be some different blood vessel layers there. They're going to be the ones that either dilate, get bigger to allow more blood to go through them so that the heat that's stored in the blood gets released through the skin surface, or they are going to constrict. And that's going to conserve heat closer to the deeper structures so you don't lose heat, and that's what would happen in those cold environments. Okay, that's another structure. Finally, one structure we have here is going to be the erector pili muscle. If we want to write that out, erector pili. This is a smooth muscle. Hopefully you remember from your nervous system lecture that it is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. When it contracts, it raises or changes the angle of that hair and causes the skin around the hair to pucker, and so it gives you goosebumps. And so that's what contraction of the erector pili muscle does. Okay, so let's go through and let's fill out some of the things, other things in our notes so that we make sure that we have all of the accessory structures down. So in the papillary layer, we're going to have free nerve endings, and these are going to sense pain. We're also going to have Meissner's corpuscle. You may also see that written in your textbook as a tactile corpuscle, okay, and that is going to sense light pressure or light touch, okay. The other accessory structure we have here is the subpapillary plexus, which contains blood, and that's very important in thermoregulation. All right, other nervous structures we have here, we have the Pacinian corpuscle. This is going to sense deep pressure and vibration. We're also going to have the root hair plexus, and I'll point that out. This is going to detect hair movement and pain. And so let me point that out briefly. You may notice over here these black structures that are wrapping around the root of the hair. Okay, and so that's why if you pull out your hair by the root, it gives you a little of pain. That's the root hair plexus right there, sensing that. But more importantly, it's what helps you sense the movement of your hair. If you have hair on your arms, it can help sense a bug landing, different things like that, as that hair gets moved around. And then finally, the structure that we, some of the final structures is we have the erector pili muscle, and then we are also going to have glands, and we're going to go more into depth about these glands. These glands, the bulk of the glands are in the reticular layer. They're actually going to send some of the secretory duct portion up through the papillary layer and past the epidermis to get to the surface. Okay. And I guess too, if we're going to do that, we're also going to have the bulk of the hair follicle is going to be in that reticular layer. Again, the hair structure has to go up through the papillary layer, past the epidermis in order to get to the surface. Okay, so let's also make sure that we have this information about the different types of glands. Okay, so if we look here in our textbook on page 166, what you're going to see are two different types of glands. One is a sebaceous gland. This is probably more common. You notice here's the gland, and it is located in the reticular layer, and it is going to have its secretory system open directly on the surface of the hair. Okay. In contrast, we have what's called a sebaceous follicle, and this is going to release secretions onto the skin surface. Okay, so let's just go through here. So a typical sebaceous gland, this is going to be in the reticular layer of the dermis. Okay, distribution in the body, anywhere there's a hair. Okay, so what does it secrete? A substance called sebum. Okay, this is an oily secretion. Does it secrete onto the hair or the skin surface? Well, the hair. And the purpose of this secretion, it is going to lubricate the hair and the skin, and it also has an antibacterial component to it, so it can actually fight bacteria that might be on the surface of our skin that could be trying to get deeper into our skin. Okay. Now, sebaceous follicle, the bulk of it is also going to be located on the reticular layer. It's going to be found on the face, the back, the chest, the nipples, and also the external genitalia. Okay. It's also going to secrete sebum, and it is going to be found on the skin surface. Because these glands, or these follicles, are secreting sebum, the function is going to be the same as for the typical sebaceous gland. The interesting thing about these follicles is that their production of sebum after birth really is very, very low until you hit puberty, and then at puberty these follicles start really increasing their secretions. Okay. Now let's talk about the two different types of sweat glands. So if we look here at page 167, this is going to give us an image. Here's an apocrine sweat gland, and then here's a merocrine sweat gland right here. Okay, so you may notice the apocrine is secreting onto the surface of a hair, and then the merocrine is going to be secreting directly onto the surface of the skin. Okay, so if we look here, let's start with merocrine first. So again, this is mostly in the reticular layer. Of the dermis. Okay. Merocrine sweat glands, those are the sweat glands that we typically think of whenever we think of that watery sweat that we produce whenever we get hot or if we get nervous, those sorts of things. So if you think about it, these glands are really all over, but they have a very high density on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. Okay, this is the one that it secretes directly onto the skin surface. Okay, and this one is the one that's going to be functioning in thermoregulation, so it cools you down. It also is what helps to excrete salts and wastes, and then it turns out this one also has some antibacterial properties as well. Okay. Apocrine sweat glands, again, we're going to find those in the reticular layer. So those glands, they're all, the bulk of them in that reticular layer. These are found in the armpit, the groin area, and the nipples. Okay, so this is kind of what it secretes is sweat plus some extra proteins and lipids. Okay, so it's sweat plus a few extra things. This is secreting onto a hair, and the function of the secretion, it's not completely known, but they think it might be related to pheromones, which those are chemicals that we know very well. They've been well characterized in other animal species, but these are what help attract mates, and so the thought is possibly they may be acting in this way for humans as well. And so I believe that that takes us through the dermis, through all of the structures. A couple of things that I want to point out, again, aging and also exposure to UV light. They're going to reduce the amount of the elastic fibers in the dermis. This gives you wrinkles and sagging skin. Okay? And so say if you gain or lose weight quickly, or I should say if you gain weight quickly, particularly women experience this often during pregnancy, the skin is stretched so fast that the elastic fibers it's like a slinky. You stretch out so fast and so hard that they can't return back to their original shape. And so that's what gives you the stretch marks on your skin. Okay. The other thing I want to point out is that it turns out the fibers in the skin, they're arranged along these lines on the body. Some of them may be going in opposite ways, but most of them are not. Most of them go in these lines, and those lines are called cleavage lines. And so actually now whenever they're doing surgeries, they try and actually make an incision parallel to these cleavage lines because you get less scarring and better healing because that skin is more likely to come back together. If you cut it along this way, then those fibers tend to kind of pull the edges of the skin apart, and you're going to get more scarring and possibly worse healing. And so the rest of these activities help you label these different structures, sort them into their correct categories, correct layers, and make sure that you really understand this information. Please feel free at any point to email your instructor for further clarification.